welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I'd like to explain how to go about doing the nested if statement in 7 minutes or less. Let's see how we do. So, if you have just started using Excel, if you're brand new to if statements, then this tutorial essentially is not for you. You need a more basic tutorial that looks at the if statement as an introductory tutorial. This is more intermediary going on to advanced. So the if statement here um, can be applied to this sheet that I have prepared. And in fact, it is a real sheet that I use when I want to calculate the scores or points that teams have in football tournaments. And by football, I mean the real football, which is soccer, right? And so if you think about a soccer match, or if you're not aware of how the point system works, then essentially what happens is if a team wins, then that team gets 3 points. If the team loses, the team gets 0 points. And if the team draws with another team, then both teams get 1 point, right? They would not be able to, it would be more difficult and complex for them to look at the scores, the amount of scores that each team makes, and then use that to determine if a team advances to the next round. It's a lot more feasible for them to use points to do that. So if you're looking at the first match here, for example, on July 10th, we know that Mexico played Trinidad and Tobago, and neither team scored. And so 1 point would be assigned to Mexico, and 1 point would be assigned to Trinidad and Tobago. At the very top here, I have a more complex formula that will essentially begin to calculate the teams that are on top, right? And so forth and so on. Now, on July 11th, the United States beat Haiti, 1-0. US scored 1 goal, Haiti scored nil, and so the US would get 3 points here, and Haiti would get zero. Jamaica had beaten Suriname by scoring 2 goals, and so Jamaica would get 3 points here, and Suriname would get zero. And then Qatar and Panama had drawn their match on July 13th, and so forth and so on. So we could essentially look at each match and put in the scores here if a team won, lost, or draw, right? But that is quite cumbersome and essentially defeats the purpose if we have to do all of this work while we're using a spreadsheet program, which should be able to take on that burden for us. So what we're going to do instead is use the nested if statement here, because if you remember, an if statement essentially has a logical check. It checks if some condition is true. In other words, check if we're starting with Mexico, check if Mexico had beaten Trinidad and Tobago. And if it had, we have a true value. In this case, our true value would be 3. And if it did not beat Mexico, now we have a problem. Because if it did not beat Mexico, we could say, okay, Mexico won. And so the United States would get 0 points, right? So the logical check, if Mexico had beaten, I'm sorry, I said the United States. If Mexico had beaten Trinidad and Tobago, that's our logical check, then true. But if not, it could mean they lost, and so 0 points for Mexico. However, there is another condition here, which is the draw. So if Mexico had not beaten, if the false value is that Mexico had not beaten Trinidad and Tobago, it could either be that they lost, or it could either be that they drew. If we were only looking at wins and losses, we could get rid of that, and we could do an if statement here by starting as we would with an equal sign for all formula, and we would enter if here, right, to denote to the program that we're starting with an if statement. And most spreadsheet programs will essentially give you the expression that you need, and give you some indication, some aesthetic indication of the portion that you're writing. So in this case, it's your logical check, right? The logical check here would be we're checking the score of Mexico. So that score is inside C11. And we would be checking if that score, and you could pause the video to see if you could finish that logical check on your own at this point. But we're going to check if that score is greater than Trinidad and Tobago, right? That's the check. Did they win? If they won, then the score would be higher because they would score more goals. And we know that when we're done with that check, we're going to put a comma in to denote to the program that we are done with that check. And the next value is the false value, the true value, I'm sorry. So what should happen if that value is true? In other words, if Mexico scored more than Trinidad and Tobago in this case, we're going to apply the 3 from here because we do know that 3 points are applied to the winner. And once we're done with that true value, what comes next is our comma, and the false value comes afterwards. And the false value here would be 0. In other words, if C11 is greater than C12, if Mexico scored more than Trinidad and Tobago, apply 3 points. Here's my true value. If not, my false value is 0. Apply 0 points, and I would be done. And life would be fine. All right. So I could click at the bottom right here and drag my formula down, and you'll see that it applied 0 points here, which is wrong because we know that they drew, but it applied 0 points because it's not greater, right? So neither team got a point. So in this case, it would be entirely wrong for us to just have one if statement. We now need to take in a third condition, which is if they drew. And if they did, rather than using the false value to be 0, we could just use the false value as another if statement to take in both conditions here. All right. So in other words, if Mexico won, give 3, that's the true value. But if not, check again for something else. And that check would be if they drew. So let's see what that looks like. I'm going to take out the first parts, the last part once more, and I'm going to leave that check in there. So if C11 is greater than C12, we're going to apply the 3 points. And then the false value here, if it is not greater than C12, if Mexico did not score more, we now need to check once more if Mexico drew or Mexico lost. And so we would essentially start another if statement here. And of course, when you start your if statement, you have to open the brackets to tell Excel what to work out within those brackets. Here's my false value. My false value is simply do another check. Did they draw? So in other words, is C11 here equal to C12? Are they the same? And if they are, you could pause here and finish the statement. If they are, just give that team a point. And if not, you only have one condition left, which is the loss. And if they lost, then it's a 0. And you would close your bracket here. So let's look at this in a more simple form, right? If C11 is greater than C12, in other words, if Mexico won, we give Mexico 3 points. However, if Mexico did not win, they might have drawn. If they did, both cells here would be equal to the same thing. And if that's the case, done with the check, we give them 1 point. If that did not work, if they didn't draw, then we give Mexico 0 points here. All right, there's only one condition left, so you don't need another if statement here. I do see where sometimes students start writing a third if statement for the final one, but there's just one condition left, right? So you could just put a 0 in there and close your brackets. You could also do the draw here. You could say if C11, actually we did the draw. We could say if C11 is less than, C12, then 0, and then 1. We could change it around, right? But essentially, this should work because now you'll see that Mexico gets 1 point. And if we drag our formula down, we could drag all the way. Um, both teams should get a point here, but we'd have to go in to change the values because this is now C12 and C13 and C11 is what it should be. So instead of C12 and C13, we're now working with C12 and C11, the two teams here. All right. And then enter, both team gets a point. And then the same premise, you'd have to change the second one each time, but you'll note that it's now working if you change those values in there. Okay, so this is how you'd go about doing a nested if statement. It works well if you are trying to check more than one conditions in your answer. I'll give you another quick. I'll give you another quick example here that probably works if you're thinking about a company that you are collecting information. You're collecting, let's say, you're collecting uh, past due amounts from clients within your company, right? Which is also consistent with another tutorial that we did on the basics of Excel. And we're probably past the 7 minute point at this point. So that's fine. Let's do another quick example here. Let's say we had, um, let's say we're checking whether or not the client has a car, let's say SUV, um, or a truck, right? We could even say bus in there and so forth and so on. So we would like to check if the client has one of these things. And for whatever reason, if the client has one of these things, we're going to charge the client different amounts based on what that client has, right? Maybe we're fixing these vehicles. So if it's a car, let's say we charge $150. If it's an SUV, we charge 200. If it's a truck, we charge 300. And if it's a bus, we charge $500, right? So from here, we now need to check if we're going to charge them something, we now need to check what that thing is, and we also need to then apply the actual charge, right? So let's say in A7 we have the information for the actual client, and we have the type of vehicle, and then we could apply the charge, right? So let's say client one. When I say client one here, client two, and so forth and so on. And then client one has a truck, client two has SUV, car, another car, a bus, SUV, and another car, right? And we now need to check. We now need to check how much we should be charging each client based on the type of vehicle that he or she drives. Based on what we've done so far, you could go ahead and pause the video here and try to finish the if statement on your own or pause at specific intervals, right? I'm going to start with the equal sign, just as we had done before. I'm going to type if, open brackets. I need now my logical expression. And in essence, I'm checking the type of vehicle here. I'm checking if it is a truck. And if it is, I'll simply start from the first vehicle, right? So check if it is a car rather, right? And if it is, we should be charging this amount. So if B8 here is a car, we're done with the check here. I'm going to charge 150, right? And if that's my true value, my false value, if there was only one other condition, would be to check if B8 is equal to an SUV, right? And if it is, then I would charge 200. But the issue here is that I have more than one conditions. I have three other conditions that I need to include. And so what I'm going to do instead is to do another if statement. So if B8 is equal to A1, I'm going to apply B1. If not, I now need to check once more if B8 is equal to the SUV. And if it is, so if B8 here is equal to the SUV, and if it is, I am going to apply, if it is, I'm going to apply the 200. All right, once you're done with that check, you still have two other conditions that you have to take care of. So although you're done with that true value, you still have another two. So we're still going to have to do another if statement here. We're then going to check if B11 is equal to this, right? And if it is, we're going to apply the 300. Right? And now there's just one value left. And so from here, we don't need to do another if statement. Essentially, if all these conditions that we included from here to here, if all these conditions are not true, there's just one condition left. It's a bus. If it's not a car, and it's not an SUV, and it's not a truck, then the only other condition left is the bus. And so we could simply put our false value in there as 500, and we would close the bracket here. So just bear in mind that when you're doing the if statement, essentially you are checking just as you would with a simple if statement. You are checking some condition, but if that condition is not true, because you have two or more conditions left, you have to put another if statement in there. All right. And depending on how much conditions you have, you would have that amount of nested if statements. And you also have to check how many times you open the bracket and ensure that you have the appropriate closures in there. So if you open the bracket 3 times, then at the end, you also need to close 3 times. And the spreadsheet program is suggesting an autofill. I won't do the autofill right now because if I do that, we didn't make anything absolute in here. And so if I drag down, I'm going to have some errors. But you could essentially do this as a practice for the rest to see if they work, right? And you'll note here that essentially it gave me the charge for a truck, which is $300. So we are right on point. If I change this to, let's say, a bus, then my charge here should change to 500. If I changed it to a car, then my charge here should change to 150. So you can see how the spreadsheet program is helping you to be more efficient as you do your calculations, because if you even made an error in the type, you could change the type here and it would automatically change the charge for you. And if this is dependent or has some antecedent condition elsewhere, then that would change elsewhere as well. All right. Any questions, just go ahead and leave a comment and try to sort those out for you.